The observation deck wrapped around the entire lower section of the conservation station, giving researchers a full view of the habitats below. Rachel Foster pressed her forehead against the cool glass and watched the creatures that most species in the galaxy feared above all others. The Kryn moved like liquid shadows across their enclosure. Shadowmane, the female, stretched her massive body across a heated rock platform. Her mate, Nightclaw, paced the perimeter, checking every corner of their territory. Both animals stood, nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder, with muscular frames built for bringing down prey 3 times their size. Their fur absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making them seem like holes in reality itself. Rachel had studied predators her entire life: earthwolves, lions, bears, even the great sharks that ruled the oceans. But the Kryn were something else entirely. They came from a world where gravity pulled twice as hard as Earth, where every creature had evolved to either kill efficiently or die quickly. The Kryn had chosen to kill. "You should not stand so close to the glass," a voice said behind her. Rachel turned to see Director Vone approaching. The Tellian stood on 4 legs, his body covered in thick gray hide. His people ate plants and had evolved running away from predators, not studying them. Most of the galaxy was like Vone. They feared apex hunters and kept their distance. "The glass is reinforced," Rachel said. "It could stop a missile." "The glass is not what concerns me," Vone replied. He moved beside her but kept several feet back from the window. "Shadowmane has been watching you for the past hour. That is predator behavior we do not fully understand." Rachel looked down again. Sure enough, Shadowmane had lifted her head and was staring directly at the observation deck. Directly at Rachel. "She is curious," Rachel said. "Not aggressive." "How can you tell the difference?" "Her ears are forward but relaxed. Her tail is still. If she saw me as a threat or prey, her body would be tense. She is just interested." Vone made a sound that his translator rendered as nervous laughter. "Your species has a strange relationship with danger, Dr. Foster. You seek it out." "We try to understand it," Rachel corrected. "There is a difference." She had heard variations of this conversation a dozen times since arriving at the station 2 months ago. The galaxy was divided into simple categories: predators and prey, hunters and hunted. The prey species far outnumbered the predators, but they could never fully relax. Evolution had taught them that apex hunters were always dangerous. Humans complicated that simple division. They were predators, but they did not act like other predators. They did not challenge for territory or resources in the same way. They formed alliances with former prey species. They even kept predators as companions in their homes, raising the young of wolves and great cats as if they were family members. The rest of the galaxy found this disturbing. "I must tell you why I came to find you," Vone said. His translator added a note of formality to his words. "Shadowmane is carrying cubs. Our scans confirmed it this morning." Rachel felt excitement rush through her. "That is incredible news. The Kryn are critically endangered. How many?" 4, possibly 5. It is difficult to determine with certainty." Vone paused. "But this presents a significant problem for your research." "What problem?" "Galactic conservation law is very clear on this matter. When apex predators are in breeding condition, and especially after the young are born, no other predator species may approach within 50 meters. No exceptions." Rachel had known this was coming, but the disappointment still hit hard. Even through reinforced barriers? Even then. "Dr. Foster, you must understand, this is not an arbitrary rule. It is based on 10,000 years of documented attacks. Every predator species in the galaxy becomes extremely aggressive when protecting young. They do not distinguish between genuine threats and scientific observation. They see another predator, and instinct takes over. Humans are not like that," Rachel argued. "We have raised the young of other predators for thousands of years." "Yes, and that is precisely what makes other species nervous." Vone's translator added emphasis to his words. "Your people do things that should not be possible. You approach apex hunters and they accept you. You take their offspring and teach them to trust you. It is not natural." It is perfectly natural for us, which is why the Council worries. Vaughn moved away from the glass. Please understand, I'm not trying to insult your species, but from our perspective, humans are predators who do not follow predator rules. That makes you unpredictable. Unpredictable predators are the most dangerous kind. Rachel looked down at Shadowmane again. The Kryn was still watching her. When will the cubs be born? 3 weeks, perhaps 4. After that, you will need to observe from the upper monitoring station. It is further away but still provides adequate viewing angles. And if something goes wrong, if the cubs need medical attention, we have robotic systems for such emergencies. They can be controlled remotely. Vaughn started walking toward the exit. I am sorry, Dr. Foster. I know you traveled very far to study the Kryn, but the law exists for good reasons. Too many caretakers have died approaching the young of apex predators. We cannot risk it, not even for science. He left her alone at the observation deck. Rachel stayed at the glass for another hour, watching the Kryn pair prepare their den. Shadowmane had started gathering soft materials into a corner of the habitat, building a nest for cubs that would be born into a world that might not have room for them anymore. The Kryn had once numbered in the millions across their homeworld. Then their sun had started dying, expanding into a red giant that baked their planet. Rescue teams had managed to save only a few thousand. Disease and the stress of relocation had killed most of those. Now Shadowmane and Nightclaw represented one of the last breeding pairs in existence. 4 cubs, maybe 5. An entire species balanced on such a fragile hope. Rachel understood why the rules existed, but she also understood something the rest of the galaxy did not seem to grasp. Predators were not mindless killing machines. They were intelligent, emotional, and capable of forming bonds that crossed species lines. She had seen it in the wolves her grandmother raised, the way they accepted humans into their pack structure, the way they trusted and protected. But the galaxy had decided long ago that such trust was impossible between different predator species, especially when young were involved. Rachel placed her hand against the glass. Far below, Shadowmane stood and moved to the window. She looked up at Rachel with eyes that reflected the habitat lights like amber flames. Then the Kryn did something unexpected. She sat down directly below the observation point and continued staring upward. Not aggressive, not fearful, just watching, just curious, just like Rachel was watching her. 2 predators, separated by reinforced glass and millions of years of evolution, trying to understand each other. Rachel smiled. 3 weeks until the cubs arrived. 3 weeks until the rules said she had to step back and observe from a distance. She would follow the rules. But she had a feeling those rules were about to be tested in ways no one expected. 3 weeks had passed too quickly. Rachel had spent every permitted moment watching Shadowmane prepare for her cubs. The Kryn female had built an impressive nest in the corner of the habitat, layered with soft materials that the automated systems provided. Nightclaw had become more protective, his patrol patterns tighter and more aggressive toward anything that moved near their space. Then the cubs came. Rachel watched from the upper, monitoring station as Shadowmane gave birth to 4 tiny creatures that looked nothing like the fearsome predator their mother was. They were blind, helpless things that mewed and crawled toward warmth. Shadowmane cleaned each one carefully, her massive jaws gentle enough to cradle beings that weighed less than 5 pounds. For 2 days, everything was perfect. The station staff monitored from a distance. The cubs fed and grew stronger. Shadowmane barely left the nest, and Nightclaw brought her food from the automated feeding systems. Rachel had moved to the upper station as required, watching through screens instead of glass. She hated being so far away but understood the necessity. The cubs were vulnerable. Shadowmane's protective instincts would be at their highest. Then the alarm started. Rachel was reviewing behavioral notes when the emergency sirens filled every corridor of the station. Her tablet lit up with red warning text. Hull breach, Sector 7. That was the Kryn habitat. She ran. The corridors filled with staff members rushing to emergency stations. Rachel pushed through them, her heart pounding. By the time she reached the observation area, a crowd had already gathered. Director Vaughn stood at the command console, his 4 legs planted firmly as he directed the crisis response. What happened? Rachel demanded. Meteorite impact, small but fast enough to penetrate the outer hull. Vaughn did not look away from his screens. It passed through 3 sections before stopping. One of those sections was the Kryn habitat. Rachel looked at the monitors. The habitat's main area showed significant damage. Structural panels had been torn away. The atmospheric containment field flickered with instability. "Where are the Kryn?" she asked. Vaughn touched a control, and the screen changed to show the nest area. Rachel's breath caught. Nightclaw lay motionless near the entrance, his body partially crushed by fallen debris. Shadowmane had been thrown against the far wall. She was breathing but unconscious, blood matting her dark fur. And the cubs. The 4 cubs were trapped in a sealed corner, where the emergency bulkhead had activated. The small space was intact, but the life support indicators showed red across all readings. "The emergency system sealed them in," Vaughn explained. "It saved their lives, but that section is losing atmosphere. The breach damaged the environmental controls." "How long do they have?" Rachel asked. 2 hours at most, possibly less. Vaughn manipulated the controls, bringing up additional data. "We are attempting to access the repair systems remotely, but the damage is extensive. Someone will need to enter the habitat and fix the environmental controls manually, then send someone in. It is not that simple." Vaughn finally looked at her. "The cubs are terrified, watch." He played back footage from 10 minutes earlier. A repair drone had entered through an emergency access port. The cubs, blind and frightened, had attacked it immediately. Their small teeth and claws could not damage the machine, but they could prevent it from working. The drone had retreated after multiple impacts. "We have tried 4 different drones," Vaughn said. "The cubs attack anything that enters their space. They are operating on pure instinct. Anything that moves is either mother or threat." Rachel studied the monitors. The cubs huddled together in the failing environment. They called out for Shadowmane, their cries growing weaker as the air thinned. "What about the automated systems?" someone asked. "Can we flood the area with sedative gas?" "The atmospheric controls are damaged," Vaughn replied. "We cannot introduce anything into that sealed section without fixing the environmental systems first. And we cannot fix the systems while the cubs attack our drones." The room fell silent except for the alarm tones and the distant sound of repair crews working on the hull. "Breach. Someone has to go in there," Rachel said quietly. "A person, not a machine." "Absolutely not." Vaughn turned to face her fully. "Dr. Foster, I know what you are thinking. The answer is no. Those cubs will die in less than 2 hours, and whoever enters that space will likely die in less than 2 minutes. Vaughn gestured at the screens. "They are Kryn cubs. Even at this age, their bite strength is sufficient to tear through flesh. Their mother is unconscious and cannot call them off. Their father is dead. They are alone, terrified, and will attack anything they perceive as a threat." "I can do this," Rachel said. "You are a predator species. Your scent alone will trigger their defensive instincts, or it will make them understand I am not prey. I am something like them." Vaughn shook his head. "Your species has experience with Earth predators. These are not Earth predators. The Kryn evolved on a world where showing any weakness meant death. Those cubs carry millions of years of survival instinct. They will not hesitate. They will not consider your intentions. They will simply attack." Rachel looked around the observation room. Representatives from a dozen species stood watching. All of them were silent. None volunteered. She understood why. The prey species could not approach apex predator cubs without triggering every instinct the young creatures possessed, and the other predator species present, few as they were, would not risk it. Predators did not trust other predators near their young. That was the universal rule, but humans had broken universal rules before. "I am going in," Rachel said, "with or without permission. I cannot authorize this. The liability alone is considerable. If you die, the incident reports would be reviewed for years. Then I will sign whatever releases you need, but I am going in." Rachel met Vaughn's eyes. "Director, those are the last 4 Kryn cubs that may ever be born. If they die because we were too afraid to help them, we are not running a conservation station. We are running a tomb." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the other staff members watched and waited. "You would need protective gear," he finally said, "and I would need to contact the Council for emergency authorization." "There is no time for councils," Rachel replied. "Every minute we debate, those cubs are dying, which is why I will grant you emergency authorization under crisis protocols." Vaughn straightened his posture. "But understand this, Dr. Foster. If you enter that habitat and the cubs attack, we will not be able to help you. We cannot risk additional personnel while the structural integrity is compromised. You will be alone. I understand. Do you? Vaughn moved closer. The galaxy will call you either a hero or a fool. There will be no middle ground. Rachel looked at the screen one more time. The cubs lay together, their small bodies rising and falling with increasingly labored breaths. She thought about the wolf cubs her grandmother had raised, the way they had learned to trust, the way fear could be overcome with patience and understanding. She thought about every human who had ever reached out to something dangerous and said, "I am not your enemy. Get me the protective gear," Rachel said. "And unlock the access port." Vaughn held her gaze, then nodded slowly. "May your instincts prove better than our experience," he said. Rachel headed for the equipment room. She had 90 minutes to save 4 lives and prove that trust could exist where everyone said it could not. The protective suit felt wrong. Rachel stripped off the armored chest piece and most of the padding. If she was going to do this, she needed the cubs to smell her properly. She needed them to understand she was not a machine or a threat wrapped in metal. She was a living being just like them. "You are removing your protection," Vaughn observed through the equipment room's communication panel. "That defeats the purpose." "The purpose is not to survive their attacks," Rachel replied as she pulled on a simple environment suit. "The purpose is to prevent attacks in the first place." She kept only the basic suit that would protect her from the failing atmosphere. Everything else went back on the rack. Her hands would be bare, her neck exposed. If the cubs wanted to hurt her, they would be able to. That was the point. The airlock waited at the end of a short corridor. Through the small window, Rachel could see into the damaged habitat. Debris floated in the reduced gravity field. Emergency lights flickered. The whole space looked like a wound torn into the station's side. "Dr. Foster, your biometric readings show elevated heart rate," Vaughn said. "You are afraid." "Of course I am afraid," Rachel replied. "Fear means I am paying attention. Fear also produces chemical signals. The cubs will smell it. They will also smell that I am not running away. That matters more." Rachel approached the airlock. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the controls. The door hissed open, revealing the small chamber that separated safety from danger. "Once you are inside, I am sealing the corridor behind you," Vaughn explained. "If the cubs breach your suit, you will have approximately 3 minutes before consciousness fails. The medical team will be ready, but they cannot reach you quickly." "I know." "The repair kit is already inside, attached to the wall near the environmental controls. You will need to replace 3 damaged circuits and reset the system. The process should take 15 minutes if uninterrupted." "Understood." Rachel stepped into the airlock. The door closed behind her with a sound like finality. Through the inner window, she could see the sealed section where the cubs waited. The emergency bulkhead was transparent, designed to let caretakers check on animals without entering their space. Rachel could see the 4 small shapes huddled together. They looked so fragile. How could anyone fear them? But she knew the answer. Fear was not about current threat. Fear was about potential. Those cubs would grow into apex predators capable of taking down prey 10 times their size. Every species in the galaxy knew what the Kryn became. They struggled to see what the Kryn were right now. Helpless children who needed someone to save them. Rachel pressed the control to open the inner airlock door. The habitat's atmosphere rushed past her. Pulled by the pressure differential, the suit's systems compensated automatically. She stepped through into the damaged space. Immediately, the cubs reacted. 4 small heads lifted. Blind eyes could not see her, but noses detected her scent. Ears tracked her movement. The cubs rose on unsteady legs and formed a defensive cluster. The largest cub, probably male, stepped forward. His mouth opened to show tiny teeth. A sound came from his throat, something between a growl and a cry. He was trying to be fierce, trying to protect his siblings. He was terrified. Rachel dropped to her knees. The movement was slow, deliberate. She made herself smaller, less threatening. Predators understood body language better than words. The cubs did not attack. They watched her with their heads tilted, trying to understand what she was. Rachel began to hum. The sound came from deep in her chest, a low vibration that her grandmother had taught her. It was not exactly like the sounds Mother Kryn made, but it was close enough. A rumble of calm, a signal that said, "You are safe." The cubs' aggressive posture faltered. They knew this sound, even if the voice was wrong. Rachel stayed kneeling. She did not approach them. Instead, she turned her attention to the environmental control panel on the wall. It was damaged but accessible. She pulled the repair kit from its mounting and opened it. The largest cub took a step toward her. Then another. Rachel kept humming. She pulled components from the repair kit and examined the damaged circuits. Her hands moved steadily despite the fear that made her heart race. The cubs needed to see calm. They needed to believe everything was normal. Another cub approached. This one was smaller, probably female. She stretched her neck forward, sniffing toward Rachel. Rachel held perfectly still except for her hands, which continued working on the repairs. She let the cub investigate her scent. After a moment, the small female made a decision and came closer. She touched her nose to Rachel's arm. The contact lasted only a second, but it was enough. The cub had tested this strange creature and found it acceptable. She returned to her siblings, and the defensive formation broke apart slightly. Rachel allowed herself a small breath of relief. First barrier passed. She removed the first damaged circuit. The environmental system indicators flickered. She had to work quickly now before the atmosphere degraded further. The cubs circled her slowly, their movements clumsy but curious. They bumped into debris and each other. One stumbled and fell against Rachel's leg. She steadied him gently with one hand while her other hand continued the repairs. The cub that had touched her did not move away. He leaned against her, accepting her presence. Throughout the station, on screens in every department, staff members watched. Word had spread quickly. A human was inside the Kryn habitat. A human was surrounded by apex predator cubs, and somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. Vaughn watched from the command center, his translator silent. He had seen many things in his decades running the conservation station. He had witnessed births and deaths, successes and failures, but he had never seen anything like this. A predator species, approaching the young of another predator species, and being accepted. It should not be possible. But humans seem to specialize in things that should not be possible. Rachel installed the second circuit. The environmental controls began coming back online. Oxygen levels stabilized. Temperature regulation resumed. The atmosphere in the sealed section was no longer failing, but Rachel's work was not done. She needed to install one more circuit and reset the entire system. Another 10 minutes at least. The cubs had all approached now. They surrounded her, their small bodies pressing against her legs and back. The largest cub lay down beside her, his head resting on her foot. The smallest climbed partially into her lap, seeking warmth. Rachel continued working, barely breathing. Every movement was careful. Every sound she made was gentle. The cubs had accepted her presence, but trust was fragile. One wrong move could shatter it. Her grandmother's words came back to her. Words spoken over a litter of wolf pups decades ago on Earth. They do not need you to be strong. They need you to be safe. If you can be both, they will follow you anywhere. Rachel installed the third circuit. The system came fully online with a soft chime. Environmental controls restored. Atmosphere normalized. The cubs were safe. But Rachel faced a new problem. The cubs were hungry. They had not eaten since before the accident. Their mother was unconscious and could not feed them. The automated feeding systems for the cubs were also damaged. Rachel checked her suit's emergency supplies. She had nutrient bars designed for human consumption. They were not ideal for Kryn physiology, but they would keep the cubs alive until proper food could be provided. She broke a bar into small pieces and placed them on the floor around her. The cubs smelled the food immediately. The largest approached first, cautious but interested. He sniffed a piece, then picked it up in his mouth. He chewed once, twice, then swallowed. The others followed his lead. Rachel watched them eat, these tiny apex predators accepting food from her hands. She thought about all the species watching on monitors throughout the station. She thought about what they were learning. Trust was not about removing all danger. Trust was about believing that not all danger needed to be feared. The smallest cub finished eating and curled up against Rachel's side. She reached down slowly and placed her hand on his small head. Did not pull away. Outside the sealed section, security cameras recorded every moment. The footage was already being transmitted to nearby ships, to research stations, to the Galactic Conservation Council. Everyone was watching a human do something they had all believed was impossible. And in the medical bay, Shadowmane was waking up. Shadowmane opened her eyes to unfamiliar lights and the scent of medicine. Her body ached from injuries she could not remember receiving. She tried to stand, but pain flared through her shoulder and ribs. Where was she? Where was her mate? Where were her cubs? The memories came flooding back. The terrible sound of impact. Debris falling. Nightclaw's body going still. The panic of trying to reach her cubs before everything went dark. Her cubs. Shadowmane forced herself upright despite the pain. Medical equipment beeped in alarm around her. She heard voices beyond the transparent barrier of the medical bay, speaking in languages she did not understand. Then she saw the screens. Monitors showed her habitat from multiple angles. She saw Nightclaw's body, covered now with a respectful cloth. She saw the damage to their territory, and she saw the sealed section where her cubs should be, where her cubs were. But they were not alone. A human sat in the center of the sealed space. The creature from the observation deck. The one who had watched Shadowmane for weeks with eyes that showed curiosity rather than fear. And her cubs, all four of them, were touching the human. Shadowmane's first instinct was rage. A predator near her vulnerable young, her muscles tense to attack, even though she was separated from the habitat by the entire length of the medical bay. But then she looked closer. The cubs were not fighting. They were not afraid. The smallest one had curled against the human's side, sleeping peacefully. The others rested nearby, their bodies relaxed in a way that only came when they felt completely safe. Shadowmane watched the human's movements. Slow, gentle, non-threatening. The creature's hands moved over one cub, checking him, and the cub accepted the touch without flinching. This was not predator behavior. This was pack behavior. Medical staff noticed Shadowmane was awake. Director Vone entered the bay carefully, staying near the door where he could escape if needed. "Please remain calm," he said through his translator. "Your cubs are safe." Shadowmane looked at him, then back at the screens. She made a sound low and questioning. "The human is Dr. Rachel Foster," Vone explained. "There was an accident. The habitat was damaged. Your mate did not survive. I am deeply sorry." Shadowmane felt the loss like a physical wound. Nightclaw, her partner for 6 years, gone. Your cubs were trapped. Vone continued. They were dying. Our machines could not reach them. Dr. Foster volunteered to enter the habitat. Shadowmane growled. Every instinct told her this was wrong. Humans were predators, strange predators who broke the natural rules, but predators nonetheless. They should not be near cubs, yet her cubs were alive. They were breathing. They were calm. She repaired the environmental systems, Vone said. She fed them when they were hungry. She has been with them for 3 hours now. They have accepted her presence. Shadowmane studied the screens more carefully. The human was humming. The sound was wrong, not quite right, but close enough to the comfort sounds that Kryn mothers made. The cubs responded to it, their ears perked forward. The largest cub, her brave male, approached the human and bumped his head against her shoulder. The human reached up and gently scratched behind his ear. The cub leaned into the touch. Something changed in Shadowmane's understanding. She had heard stories about humans, how they took the young of other predators and raised them, how they formed bonds with creatures that should have been their competitors. Other species found this disturbing, but Shadowmane suddenly understood it differently. Humans were pack builders. They saw potential family where others saw only threat. Her cubs were safe because this human had seen them as worth saving, even at risk to herself. Shadowmane made a sound. Not aggressive. Not fearful. It was the sound a Kryn made when accepting a new pack member. Vone's translator struggled with the meaning. "You are not angry?" Shadowmane looked at him and made the sound again, more deliberately. Understanding crossed Vone's face. "You want Dr. Foster to bring the cubs to you," Shadowmane confirmed with a short bark. "That would require her to walk through station corridors with 4 Kryn cubs," Vone said slowly. "No one has ever attempted such a thing. We have no protocols." Shadowmane did not care about protocols. She cared that her cubs were separated from her. She cared that they needed their mother. And she cared that this human had earned the right to be trusted. She barked again, more insistent. Vone left the medical bay. Shadowmane could see him on the screen, speaking into communication devices. Other staff members appeared, arguing and gesturing. The debate lasted several minutes. Finally, Vone's voice came through the medical bay's speakers. Dr. Foster, can you hear me? On the screen, the human looked up. I hear you, Director. Shadowmane is awake. She is aware of the situation. She wants you to bring the cubs to her. The human stood slowly, carefully, making sure not to disturb the sleeping cubs. The cubs will need to follow me. I cannot carry all 4. That is the concern. Will they follow you? I believe so. But I need Shadowmane to call to them. They need to hear their mother's voice so they understand where we are going. Phone looked at Shadowmane. Can you do this? Shadowmane stepped closer to the speakers. She called out to her cubs using the sound that meant come home, come to safety, come to mother. On the screens, all 4 cubs lifted their heads. They knew that voice. They began crying out in response. They hear you, Rachel said. I am opening the seal now. Give me a moment to prepare them. Shadowmane watched as the human knelt among her cubs. The human spoke to them in her strange language. The cubs could not understand the words, but they understood the tone, gentle, encouraging. The human stood and walked toward the exit. All 4 cubs stood and followed. Shadowmane felt something she had not expected to feel. Pride. Her cubs were brave enough to follow a strange creature through unknown territory. They trusted their instincts. They trusted what their senses told them about this human. The screens changed views as the human led the cubs out of the sealed section, through the damaged habitat into the access corridor. We are tracking their progress, Vaughn said. They should reach the medical bay in approximately 10 minutes. It was the longest 10 minutes of Shadowmane's life. She watched the screens show the human walking calmly through corridors while 4 Kryn cubs followed like ducklings after their mother. Staff members pressed themselves against walls to let them pass. Some ran. Others watched in amazement. Word spread through the station faster than the human could walk. By the time Rachel reached the final corridor, crowds had gathered at every observation window. Security feeds showed dozens of species watching. Predators and prey alike, all of them witnessing something that contradicted everything they believed about how the universe worked. The medical bay door opened. Rachel Foster entered, and 4 Kryn cubs walked behind her. Shadowmane stood despite her injuries. She called to her cubs and they ran to her on unsteady legs. She checked each one, smelling them, touching them, making sure they were truly unharmed. They were perfect. Then Shadowmane looked at the human who stood near the door. Rachel made no move to leave. She simply waited, giving Shadowmane space to reunite with her. Cubs Shadowmane made a decision that would be recorded in every xenobiology text for the next 1,000 years. She approached. Rachel, every security officer in the room tensed. Phone stepped forward, ready to activate emergency barriers. But Shadowmane did not attack. She lowered her massive head and touched her forehead to Rachel's forehead. The gesture of ultimate trust among Kryn. The acceptance of pack bond. Rachel stood perfectly still, barely breathing. She understood the significance of what was happening. Shadowmane pulled back and returned to her cubs, but she did not position her body between them and Rachel. She lay down with her cubs arranged around her, leaving space, an invitation. Rachel understood. She moved slowly, carefully, and sat down in the space Shadowmane had left. The smallest cub immediately crawled over to her, pressing against her side. Shadowmane watched this happen and did nothing to stop it. Around the galaxy, on screens in research stations and ships and government buildings, people watched the same scene, a human sitting with a Kryn mother and her cubs, protected, accepted, trusted. It should not be possible. But there it was, happening anyway, because humans had learned something the rest of the galaxy had never considered. They had learned that the most dangerous creatures could also be the most loyal. That predators understood strength, yes, but they also understood courage. And sometimes, the bravest thing a predator could do was trust another predator who chose not to be a threat. Shadowmane closed her eyes, exhausted from her injuries but finally at peace. Her mate was gone, but her cubs were safe, and somehow, impossibly, she was not alone in protecting them. She had an ally now, a strange, fragile, persistent ally who had walked into danger because it was the right thing to do. A human. The footage went viral within hours. Across dozens of worlds, billions of beings watched the same recorded moments. A human entering a damaged habitat, cubs that should have attacked instead gathering around her. The walk through station corridors with 4 apex predators following peacefully. The moment when Shadowmane touched her forehead to Rachel's in acceptance. Rachel was not aware of any of this at first. She remained in the medical bay with Shadowmane and the cubs for 2 days, leaving only when absolutely necessary. She slept in a chair while the Kryn family rested. She helped feed the cubs when Shadowmane was too injured to do so easily. She cleaned up after them and spoke to them in soft tones that they seemed to understand even if the words meant nothing. Director. Vone brought her meals and updates. There are more. Galactic Conservation Council has contacted me 17 times, he said on the second day. They want to understand what happened. They want to study your methods. There's nothing to study, Rachel replied while holding a bottle for the smallest cub. I just treated them like they were worth trusting. That is precisely what they find remarkable. Every protocol we have is based on the assumption that predator species cannot be trusted near each other's young. You have disproven that assumption. The smallest cub finished feeding and curled up in Rachel's lap. She stroked his dark fur gently. He was growing already, his movements stronger and more coordinated each day. I did not disprove anything, Rachel said. I just proved that fear is not the same as fact. The distinction matters to many species. Vone settled his bulk on the floor. I have been receiving requests from breeding programs across the sector. They want human caretakers. They want to know if your success can be replicated. My success is not my own. It belongs to Shadowmane. She chose to trust me. Without that choice, nothing else would have mattered. As if responding to her name, Shadowmane lifted her head. The Kryn's injuries were healing well. She could stand and move without significant pain now, but she showed no signs of wanting Rachel to leave. In fact, Shadowmane had become more accepting of Rachel's presence each day. She allowed Rachel to handle the cubs freely. She watched as Rachel taught them simple games, encouraging them to use their developing senses. Once, when the largest cub tried to bite Rachel's hand too hard during play, Shadowmane corrected him with a gentle but firm growl. Pack discipline. Applied equally to all members, regardless of species. Vone observed all of this with fascination. You have become part of her pack structure. This has never been documented with adult apex predators and humans before. It has been documented plenty of times on Earth, Rachel said. We just never thought to share those stories with species who believed it was impossible. On the third day, Rachel attempted to leave the medical bay for an extended period. She needed to shower properly and review the repair status of the Kryn habitat. The cubs reacted immediately. All 4 began crying out, searching for her. The smallest one tried to follow her to the door. Shadowmane calmed them but watched Rachel with what could only be described as concern. I will return, Rachel promised. I am not abandoning you. Shadowmane made a low sound. Not aggressive. More like a question. Rachel looked at Vone. Can you play that sound back to me? He did. Rachel listened carefully, then tried to replicate it. Her version was clumsy, not quite right, but close enough. She made the sound toward Shadowmane. The Kryn's ears perked forward. She responded with a similar sound. What did you just do? Vone asked. I told her I would come back. She acknowledged it. Rachel smiled. We are learning to communicate. She left the medical bay for 6 hours. The cubs cried intermittently, but Shadowmane kept them calm. Every staff member who passed the observation window stopped to watch. The Kryn mother, who should have been aggressive in her grief and protectiveness, was instead patiently waiting for a human to return. When Rachel came back, the cubs mobbed her. The smallest one climbed up her legs, demanding to be held. The largest one barked at her, clearly expressing his displeasure at being left behind. Rachel sat down among them and let them express their frustration. Shadowmane watched this interaction and did something that made Vone's translator emit a confused noise. She was making the Kryn sound for laughter. Is that possible? Vone asked. Do Kryn laugh? Apparently they do, Rachel replied while trying to prevent the cubs from chewing on her clothes. Though I doubt most researchers ever saw it. You have to be part of the family for that. The cubs' personalities became more distinct as they grew. The largest male was bold and protective of his siblings. The 2 middle cubs, 1 male and 1 female, were curious and playful. They explored everything and got into constant trouble, and the smallest, the one who had bonded most closely with Rachel, was gentle and observant. He watched everything Rachel did with intense focus. When she sat down, he sat beside her. When she moved, he followed. When she slept, he curled against her. Rachel found herself naming him in her mind, though she never spoke the name aloud. Shadow, for his dark fur and the way he followed her like one. 2 weeks after the accident, the Kryn habitat was fully repaired. New safety systems had been installed. The space had been expanded to give Shadowmane and her cubs more room. It was time for them to return home. The move should have been complicated. Protocol called for sedating the Kryn family and transporting them while unconscious. It was safer for everyone involved. But Shadowmane had other ideas. When the transport team arrived with their sedation equipment, she positioned herself between them and her cubs. She made it clear that she would not accept that approach. Rachel understood. She wants to walk there. With the cubs. She wants them to learn the station. That is impossible, a transport supervisor said. The distance is over 300 meters. Through public corridors. We would need to evacuate entire sections. Or you could just let us walk, Rachel said. Vaughn arrived before the argument could escalate. He looked at Shadowmane, at the cubs gathered around Rachel at the impasse that had developed. Clear the corridors, he ordered. We will attempt the walk. Director, the regulations specifically prohibit apex predators in public areas without containment. The regulations did not anticipate this situation. Vaughn gestured at Rachel and Shadowmane. Clear the corridors, but leave the observation windows accessible. Let the station see this. An hour later, Rachel walked through the conservation station with a Kryn mother and 4 cubs. Security teams monitored from a distance. Medical staff stood ready for emergencies. And at every observation window, crowds gathered to watch. Shadowmane walked beside Rachel, not behind or ahead. The cubs moved between them, exploring their environment but never straying far. When they encountered something new, a junction or an equipment station, the cubs would look to either Rachel or Shadowmane for guidance. Co-parenting. Cross-species co-parenting of apex predators. The walk took 40 minutes. Not because it was difficult, but because the cubs kept stopping to investigate new things. Rachel and Shadowmane patiently waited each time, letting the young ones satisfy their curiosity. They passed by the quarters of dozens of species. Prey species pressed themselves against walls, instinct overwhelming their rational minds. But predator species watched differently. They saw what was happening. They saw acceptance where there should have been aggression. A few of them, the boldest ones, approached the observation windows. They wanted a closer look at this impossible thing. Rachel noticed them watching and understood. This moment was bigger than one human and one Kryn family. This was the galaxy seeing a new possibility, that predators did not have to be solitary, that apex hunters could cooperate across species lines, that the strongest creatures could also be the most trusting. When they reached the repaired habitat, Shadowmane entered first. She checked every corner, ensuring it was safe. Then she called her cubs inside. 3 of them went immediately. But Shadow, the smallest, hesitated at the entrance. He looked at Rachel, then at the habitat, then back at Rachel. Rachel knelt down. You have to go with your mother. This is your home. Shadow made a small, sad sound. I will visit every day, Rachel promised. You are not losing me. I am just giving you space to grow. Shadowmane came back to the entrance and called to her cub. Shadow looked torn between 2 pulls, 2 pack members calling from different directions. Finally, he went to his mother, but he kept looking back at Rachel until the habitat entrance closed. Rachel stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of what she had just done. She had saved 4 lives. She had formed a bond that should not exist. She had proven something that the galaxy needed to see. But she had also just said goodbye to a small creature who trusted her completely. Vaughn found her there minutes later, still staring at the closed entrance. You did well, he said quietly. I know, Rachel replied. It just does not feel like enough. Come. I have something to show you. He led her to his office and activated the communications array. Screens filled with messages, requests from conservation stations, questions from research facilities, invitations to speak at conferences, and one message that stood out from all the others. The Galactic Conservation Council has authorized a new position, Vaughn explained. Director of Cross-Species Predator Relations. They want someone to develop training programs, to teach others what you have learned, to help breeding programs that have been failing for decades. Rachel read the message carefully. They want me to do this for other species? Other predators? They want you to prove that what happened here was not a singular event. They want you to show that humans can bridge gaps that everyone else thought were unbridgeable. Rachel thought about Shadow looking back at her. She thought about Shadowmane touching her forehead in trust. She thought about all the apex predators across the galaxy who were dying because no one knew how to help them without triggering their defensive instincts. "I will need a team," she said, "and access to research on every apex predator species in the database." Vone's translator conveyed satisfaction. "That can be arranged." Rachel looked at the screen showing the messages from across the galaxy. Every one of them was from someone who wanted to understand, who wanted to learn, who wanted to save lives. She had entered a damaged habitat 3 weeks ago believing she might die. Instead, she had started something that might change everything. "When do we start?" she asked. Vone's translator emitted his species' version of a smile. "We already have." 6 months changed everything. The conservation station had expanded 3 times to accommodate the new programs Rachel developed. Where there had been 30 predator species in breeding programs, there were now 50. Where there had been isolation protocols that kept caretakers at a distance, there were now interaction guidelines that emphasized understanding over fear. And humans were at the center of it all. Rachel stood in a teaching amphitheater that overlooked a dozen different habitats. Around her sat representatives from 20 species, all of them taking notes as she explained the principles that had saved the Kryn cubs. "You must understand that predators are not mindless," she said. "They assess threat levels constantly. If you approach with fear, they will respond to that fear. But if you approach with calm confidence, they recognize you as another predator who is not competing for resources." A Tellian in the front row raised a limb. "But humans are competing predators. You hunt, you consume meat. By definition, you compete for the same resources as the apex predators you approach." "On Earth, yes, but these predators are not from Earth. We are not competing for their prey. We are not challenging their territory. Context matters. They evaluate our intentions based on our behavior, not on abstract categories." Rachel brought up a holographic display showing body language charts for 6 different predator species. Every species has signals for dominance, submission, playfulness, and trust. Learn these signals. Respect them. The predators will understand that you understand them. She had given this lecture, or variations of it, dozens of times now. Each time she saw the same skepticism in the faces of her students. Each time she proved them wrong by demonstrating the techniques. Behind the amphitheater windows, the habitats showed the results. A human caretaker sat with a litter of Varakesh hunting cats, creatures from a volcanic world that had never trusted any species other than their own. Another human played with the cubs of Northwind bears, apex predators from an ice planet who were notorious for their aggression. And in the largest habitat, Shadowmane watched over her 4 cubs who were now adolescents approaching full size. Rachel checked the time. "That is all for today. Practice the body language exercises we discussed. Tomorrow we will begin supervised introductions with juvenile predators." The students filed out, still looking uncertain. Rachel understood. She had looked the same way 6 months ago, standing outside that airlock. Knowledge and experience were not the same thing. She left the amphitheater and walked the familiar path to the Kryn habitat. She made this journey every day, sometimes multiple times. It had become her routine, her meditation. The habitat entrance recognized her and opened automatically. Inside, the environment had been redesigned to match the Kryn homeworld as closely as possible. Rocky outcroppings, thermal vents, hunting grounds with mechanical prey that the cubs could stalk. Shadow saw her first. He was not so small anymore. At 6 months, he stood 3 feet at the shoulder and weighed nearly 100 pounds. His adult teeth had come in, capable of crushing bone. His claws could tear through metal. He bounded toward Rachel like an oversized puppy. "Careful," Rachel laughed as Shadow nearly knocked her over in his enthusiasm. "You are not a cub anymore." Shadow did not care. He rubbed his massive head against her, making the sound that Kryn used for family greetings. Rachel scratched behind his ears, the spot he loved best. The other 3 cubs approached more calmly. They had bonded with Rachel too, but not as intensely as Shadow. They greeted her with affection but returned to their activities quickly. Shadowmane watched from her resting platform. The Kryn mother had healed completely from her injuries, though the loss of Nightclaw still showed in her behaviors sometimes. She was more protective, more cautious, but she had adapted to her new situation with remarkable resilience. Rachel approached and Shadowmane lowered her head for the forehead touch that had become their greeting. Pack acknowledgement repeated every day. Your cubs are doing well, Rachel said. Shadowmane could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Praise. Satisfaction. Shadowmane made a rumbling sound and glanced at Shadow, who was now attempting to climb on Rachel's back. There was amusement in that look. My foolish cub who thinks he is still small enough for such games. Rachel extracted herself from Shadow's attention and sat on the rocks near Shadowmane. This was her favorite part of each day. Just sitting with the Kryn family, not teaching or demonstrating or explaining, just being part of the pack. Shadow settled beside her, his weight warm against her leg. She ran her hand through his fur, noting how the texture had changed as he matured, less soft, more coarse, built for protection and insulation. I received another request today, Rachel told Shadowmane. A species called the Recor. Their apex predators are dying out because no one can get close enough to provide medical care. They want me to visit their breeding facility and teach their staff. Shadowmane listened, ears forward. She did not understand the words, but she understood that Rachel was talking about leaving. I would be gone for 3 weeks, maybe a month. Rachel looked at Shadow. He would miss me. They all would. Shadowmane made a sound, low questioning. Rachel had learned to interpret many of Shadowmane's vocalizations. This one meant something like, "You will return?" "Yes," Rachel promised. "I always return. You know that." Shadowmane seemed satisfied with this answer. She stood and moved to where her other 3 cubs were wrestling with each other, play fighting, learning the skills they would need as adults. Rachel watched them and felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. They were growing so fast. Soon they would be adults. Shadowmane would teach them to hunt. They would learn independence. The bond Rachel had formed with them would change, evolve into something different. But it would not disappear. That was the remarkable thing she had learned. Predators did not forget. They might grow and change and develop new relationships, but the core bonds remained. Shadow nudged her hand, demanding more attention. Rachel smiled and complied. "You are going to be magnificent," she told him. "Strong and fast and dangerous, but I hope you will also remember to be kind, to be curious, to be willing to trust strange creatures who mean you no harm." Shadow responded by trying to chew on her sleeve. Some lessons took longer than others. Bone's voice came through her communicator. "Dr. Foster, your presence is requested in the communication center. Priority message from the Galactic Council." Rachel sighed. There was always another message, another request, another crisis that needed a human's unique approach to predator relations. She stood, and Shadow protested her departure. "I will come back this evening," she promised. "We will practice the hunting exercises." That seemed to satisfy him. Rachel left the habitat, looking back once to see Shadowmane and her 4 cubs gathered together. A family, unusual maybe, impossible by traditional standards certainly, but real nonetheless. The communication center was busy with traffic from across the sector. Phone waited for her at the main console, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "Watch this." He activated a screen showing a habitat on a station 3 systems away. A human caretaker was entering an enclosure housing a mother and cubs of a species Rachel did not recognize. Scaled, serpentine with multiple eyes. The human moved slowly, making the same non-threatening gestures Rachel had taught. The mother assessed the human for a long moment. Then she allowed the human to approach her cubs. "This is the 14th successful cross-species bonding this month," Phone said, "all using the techniques you developed. All proving that what happened with Shadowmane was not a unique event." Rachel watched the screen, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. It was never unique. It was just first. The Council wants to expand the program. They want human caretaker programs established on every conservation station in the Federation. They want a complete revision of predator interaction protocols. That will take years. Yes, but they are willing to invest those years, because the alternative is watching apex predators go extinct due to our fear of them. Phone pulled up additional data. Success rates for breeding programs have increased by 40% since implementing your protocols. Juvenile survival rates are up 60%. These numbers represent hundreds of lives saved. Rachel looked at the statistics, at the proof that what she had started was spreading. "What does the Council want from me specifically?" "They want you to lead the initiative. Full authority over the new programs. Unlimited resources. You would be the youngest being ever appointed to a Galactic Conservation Council position." It was everything she had worked toward. Everything she had hoped might be possible when she walked into that damaged habitat 6 months ago. But it would mean less time with Shadowmane and the cubs, less time doing the actual work of building trust, more time coordinating and delegating and managing. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Vone looked surprised. "Most beings would accept immediately." "I am not most beings," Rachel smiled. "I need to discuss it with my pack first." She left the communications center and returned to the Kryn habitat. Shadow greeted her enthusiastically, surprised by her quick return. She sat down among the family and explained her situation, knowing they could not understand her words but trusting they would understand her feelings. Should she take the position? Should she spread her knowledge further? Or should she stay here, continuing the direct work that felt most meaningful? Shadowmane approached and did something she had never done before. She carefully picked up Shadow by the scruff of his neck, the way she carried him when he was tiny. Shadow was far too large for this now, and the gesture was awkward, but the meaning was clear. She carried Shadow to Rachel and gently placed him in front of her. Then Shadowmane touched her forehead to Rachel's and made a sound, a long, complex vocalization that Rachel had never heard before, but she understood it anyway. "You taught me to trust. Now teach others. We will be here when you return. We are pack. Distance does not change that." Rachel felt tears forming. She touched her forehead to Shadowmane's, accepting the permission and blessing. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, Rachel stood in her quarters looking at Earth through the window. Home felt very far away, but she realized that home had expanded. It was not just one planet anymore. It was every habitat where trust replaced fear, every enclosure where predators learned that not all other predators were enemies. Her communicator chimed. A message from her grandmother on Earth. "I saw the videos, sweetheart. Your grandfather would have been so proud. You are doing what he always said was humanity's greatest gift. You are building bridges with creatures everyone else gave up on. Keep going. The universe needs more people like you." Rachel saved the message and contacted Vone. "I will take the position," she said, "but on one condition. I maintain direct caretaker duties with at least one predator family at all times. I cannot teach what I do not practice." "Agreed. The council will accept that term." "Then I accept." Rachel ended the call and returned to the window. Somewhere out there, predators were dying because no one knew how to help them. Somewhere out there, species were going extinct because fear prevented action. But now there was an alternative. Now there was proof that trust could exist between predators, that the strongest creatures could also be the most accepting. That danger did not have to mean isolation. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. Rachel opened it to find Shadow sitting outside, somehow having escaped the habitat. Again. "How do you keep doing that?" she asked. Shadow simply walked into her quarters and settled on the floor near her bed. He had no intention of leaving. Rachel could have called security, could have enforced the rules about apex predators in residential areas. Instead, she closed the door and sat beside him. "Fine, you can stay tonight. But tomorrow, we are working on boundaries." Shadow made a sound that was definitely Kryn laughter. Rachel leaned against him, this massive predator who trusted her completely and thought about the future. She had entered a damaged habitat 6 months ago to save 4 lives. Now she had the chance to save hundreds, thousands, all because she had been willing to trust first even when it was dangerous. Especially when it was dangerous, because sometimes the most dangerous thing was worth saving, and sometimes the most dangerous thing chose to save you right back.